We're joined by David Miliband, the President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
The IRC is in the middle of a historic refugee crisis emanating from Syria and Iraq. It feels limitless and endless. Can you tell us where, in your view, we are in this crisis?
Well, last year set a historic world record for the number of people displaced by conflict and disaster. 20 million refugees crossing borders, 40 million internally displaced. And the terrible thing is that this year we're going to break the world record. And Syria is the eye of the storm, 7 million internally displaced, 4.5, 5 million refugees. And of course, the arrivals in Europe are the most visible symptom of that. We deployed a team to Lesbos, the island in the Aegean, where probably half of all the refugees arriving in Europe are landing. And when we deployed there in June, there were 200 refugees a day. Now, yesterday's report was 6,000. And so you can see that while one would expect winter weather to begin to push against that tide, there's no evidence of that so far.
We've seen a huge disparity of response between European nations, some more welcome, much more welcoming than others. How do you read the response so far? How much more needs to be done?
France has agreed to take 24,000 people, the UK 4,000 or 5,000 a year. Compared to 500,000 registering in Germany for asylum claims, you can immediately see the disparity. And obviously there's an east-west split as well, in very crude terms, in Europe as well. And the freedom that Europeans enjoy includes the commitment to respect international law and to support the free movement of people and within the Union. And I think that those two things are coming under immense strain. And I hope very much that the German leadership will be matched by a sense of commitment from the European institutions, European Commission, etc., to really try and pull people into line.
You've been very critical of the US response. I think for many people in Washington and around the US, this feels like a crisis that's happening a long way away. Nobody's washing up on the shores of the US. But given that we're in the middle of a US election in which immigration has already been a very contentious issue, even when it relates to the Mexican border, do you see any political will that's going to change the US response?
Some of the candidates have spoken up about this, but you're right. The US has historically been the leader in refugee resettlement. But in the Syrian crisis, 1,815 Syrians have been resettled over 4 years. So the US is clearly not playing its leadership role there. The president said 10,000. And I think there are 2 points to make. One is that no one pretends that refugee resettlement is the answer to the Syrian war. There's a massive political, diplomatic, some would argue military component to bringing it to an end. And I think that the humanitarian element in the US has been mostly played out in respect of support for neighboring states like Jordan, but frankly that needs to go much further. So the first point is, let's understand the limits of refugee resettlement. But secondly, the UN has identified 400,000 of the especially vulnerable Syrians who've been displaced. A coalition of NGOs are calling on the US to take 100,000, which would be the historic US leadership number. And I think that there is a misunderstanding of the importance of that, or an underestimate of the importance. It's important for those 100,000 people, but it's also a show of solidarity with neighboring states that are bearing this extraordinary load and feel that they are not being helped. And so I think the symbolism as well as the substance is more important than people realize.
You come from a foreign policy background, you come from a government background, you talk about policy failure. If you were in one of those roles again today, knowing what you know about the balance of the domestic agenda, the foreign policy agenda, what do you think you would realistically be doing that Western governments are not doing right now?
In respect of the Syria crisis? I mean, I think that three things are absolutely essential in ascending order of difficulty. First of all, refugee resettlement on a scale that is manageable is a proven success story. I mean, if I think about the UK example, if you had 25,000 refugees a year in the UK, that would be 40 per parliamentary constituency. No one's going to tell me that's going to overrun the country. In the US, 10,000 people in a population of 330 million a year is not going to overrun the country. Next thing, which is frankly not that difficult, is to make sure that the neighboring states of Syria, some of whom are very close allies of the US, like Jordan, get massively greater support, economic support, not just aid support. I would urge people to think about it in terms of a Marshall Plan idea for the economy of an infrastructure of a country like Jordan over 10 years, not just an aid plan. The third thing, which I'd obviously be committed to, and I'm sure John Kerry is committed to, and other foreign ministers, is we can staunch the dying in the humanitarian sector, but we can't stop the killing. It takes politics to stop the killing. And at a time when Russia says its main concern is radicalization, and when the US has a similar concern, it doesn't seem beyond the bounds of possibilities that there's room for geopolitics to bring countries together. And that's going to have to involve the Iranians, it's going to have to involve the Turks and the Saudis, but it's absolutely essential, and there needs to be a doubling down on that drive as well.
David Miliband, thank you very much.
Thank you.